Chair, are you ready for me to start? Okay.
I can start. All right. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Kiera McGowan, and I am the Events and Digital Media Coordinator for the National Cooperative Business Association, NCBA-CLUSA. For more than 100 years, NCBA-CLUSA has been the apex association representing and assisting in the development of cooperative businesses across all sectors in the U.S., including rural cooperatives and cooperative development centers. I specifically work on the Strengthening Cooperative Ecosystems project funded by USDA NEFA through the American Rescue Program, providing technical assistance to historically underserved farmers. For anyone who is interested in the project that I am working on, I'm dropping the link in the chat. Excited to have everyone here and joining us today. In this webinar, you'll hear directly from the USDA staff about tactics you can use to strengthen your socially disadvantaged groups grant application prior to the upcoming June 3rd deadline. Our USDA partners will address key components of the application, including scoring criteria, tips on documentation, and answer any questions you may have. The topic of today's webinar is a vitally important program that improves the economic condition of rural areas by helping our socially disadvantaged groups start, expand, or improve their cooperatives. It is one of the few federal programs targeted towards this development and important for the cooperative ecosystem, in addition to our socially disadvantaged groups as well. Since the 2018 Farm Bill, programs like this and the Rural Cooperative Development Grant program have created more than 300 new businesses and helped create or save thousands of rural jobs. As one of the mainstays in federal programming to support the co-op community, NCBA-CLUSA and our stakeholders are key advocates in preserving and modernizing this program while ensuring it is fully funded in the federal budget. To find out more about NCBA-CLUSA's advocacy work, including our virtual Hike the Hill next week, where we will discuss this and the Farm Bill, follow the links in the chat, which will be posted as soon as I finish this introduction. With us today, we have our partners from USDA, who are always helpful and knowledgeable about the inner workings of the program and provide a lifeline of support in understanding the co-op ecosystem, as well as rural development and helping our socially disadvantaged groups. I thank you all for joining us here today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robbie to take you through the rest of the webinar.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Socially Disadvantaged Groups Grant session. I wanted to introduce you also to Artie Scherziger and also the co-op services team, the smiling faces behind USDA Cooperative Services. Starting on the left is Jim, then Margaret, Megan, Debbie, and myself, Robbie Fauser-Fink. Good to be here with everyone today. We are not state staff, and our goal is to assist you in finding the right personnel to discuss your application and provide application information. Our presentation will be an overview version of the slide deck. Please review this presentation for more details. It will be made available to you along with the recording of this session. And something that may help, the header of the slides indicate which section of the NOFO, it's also called a Federal Register or notice, that we are covering. Megan? You're on mute.
About that, I had a feeling I might just do that. Hey, everybody. Thanks for, inviting us to be here. Just wanted to let you know that this is an annual grant program. There's no program regulation, but it is authorized under the Consolidated Farm and Rural Development Act. And it does follow along the same lines as the Rural Cooperative Development Grant, except this program does not require any matching funds and is specifically designed for applicants that are cooperatives or cooperative development centers that are serving socially disadvantaged individuals in rural areas. The program is governed by 2 CFR Part 200 and 400 and the Notice of Funding Opportunity, affectionately called the NOFO. Next slide. SDGG is a set aside of RCDG and has different rules, slightly different rules. Each applicant can ask for a maximum of $175,000. That's different from RCDG. No match is required. For SDGG, an applicant can be a cooperative, a group of cooperatives, or a cooperative development center, so broader slate of applicants. The majority of the board of directors for these applicants must identify as a member of a socially disadvantaged group. We'll describe what that means later. Entities can receive both RCDG and SDGG funding. It has to be clear to the USDA staff that there isn't an overlap in the funding. The projects must have different purposes. The work plan tasks must not be duplicative. The project areas and beneficiaries have to be different. Additionally, the technical assistance providers must not have a conflict of interest. So the purpose of SDGG is to provide technical assistance for cooperative development to socially disadvantaged groups in rural areas. Cooperatives typically feature member control, member ownership, member benefit, and they limit dividends paid to equity investors. They pay patronage refunds based on use of the cooperative. You need to make sure that the proposed projects are in rural areas and involve cooperatives with typical cooperative characteristics. The definition of socially disadvantaged group is a group whose members have been subject to racial, ethnic, or gender prejudice because of their identity as members of a group, without regard to their individual qualities. Please note that this does not include individuals with disabilities, veterans, or those who have faced prejudice based on religious affiliation or economic status. Examples include women, African Americans, Native Americans, Alaska Natives, Hispanic people, Asian, and Pacific Islanders. There may be a group that tends to have a particular religious affiliation, but also has a common ethnicity that has resulted in a social disadvantage. Under the program, they would be considered socially disadvantaged because of their ethnicity, not their religion. Individuals who are incarcerated are not eligible unless they've faced racial, ethnic, or gender-based prejudice. So these slides are detailed. We won't go over them word for word. They're provided to give you more information to review after the webinar. Remember, the governing documents are the NOFO, the statute, and 2 CFR 200 and 400. The presentation is being recorded and our slides will be provided. Within our presentation, any underlined text is a link to that information. The goals of your project have to align with the NOFO. Be sure numbers and narrative throughout are consistent. Complete applications must be received by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on June 3rd, 2024. Applicants are strongly advised to develop a relationship with USDA Rural Development Socially Disadvantaged Group Grant staff where your project is located and discuss program information specifics with them. Please reach out to us if you are having issues finding the right staff. And here in this slide, we're describing how persistent poverty is laid out in the NOFO. For applicants and or beneficiaries of technical assistance services located in persistent poverty county seats, the population eligibility limit expands up to 55,000. There have been some additions and clarifications made to definitions within the NOFO, so please be sure to familiarize yourself with them. And I think I turn it over to Margaret now.
Yes, thank you, Megan. Yes, there are several definitions that have been clarified in the NOFO compared to last year. An added definition is the board of directors or the governing board. This is the group of individuals that govern, manage, or direct a cooperative development center, a cooperative, or a group of cooperatives. Next slide. Another definition added explains what cooperative development is. Cooperative development refers to the technical assistance definition, which makes these definitions circular. So be on the lookout for defining terms within the definitions in throughout the notice of funding availability opportunity. Projects should be showing cooperative business assistance, and the slides show different stages of what that technical assistance could be. Next slide. Key personnel definition was added to clarify what that involves. Employees, new hires, consultants, and or contractors of the Cooperative Development Center, which provides technical assistance, including cooperative development. Next definition is a nonprofit institution, as defined there. And now I turn it over to Debbie Rausch. Debbie, can you unmute yourself?
In the essence of time, I'll go ahead and take
I've
over
got
this slide. Oop,
Oh,
good, great.
got it.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem.
In the NOFA this year, we've defined or clarified what a conflict of interest means for the purposes of this program, because if there is a conflict of interest, the application will not be reviewed, and we'd like you to have the best opportunity possible. If a board member or someone that is receiving technical assistance has a relationship with the person providing technical assistance, and the person providing it is getting paid, that is a conflict of interest. Cooperatives themselves cannot receive funds to benefit them financially, meaning that they cannot get paid with grant funds. They must request funds to pay contractors or educators. Some technical assistance providers and cooperative board members serve on more than one cooperative. So you must be clear about in your application. Otherwise, it may appear to be a conflict of interest. We cannot pay for goods or services from a person who has a conflict of interest with the grantee. That could be an example, could be a family member, a member of the cooperative, or the board of directors. Some examples of a conflict of interest would be using grant funds to pay a member on the applicant's board of directors to provide technical assistance to socially disadvantaged groups. Another might be applicant paying a member of the cooperative to provide technical assistance to other members of the same cooperative. Or the last example is paying an immediate family member of the applicant to provide technical assistance to socially disadvantaged groups. Keep in mind that one of the definition, or also included in the definition, is it can be a conflict of interest or look like a conflict of interest. Either one is a problem and would not be allowed in the application. Next slide. I'm not seeing my slide. Robbie, do you want to pick it up?
Sure. This one is how cooperative was defined, or how cooperative was defined changed. Please be sure to discuss how the assistance will benefit a group create or enhance cooperative or enhance a cooperative receiving the proposed technical assistance. In particular, how it will be owned, democratically governed, and operated by those who use and benefit members from it.
Okay. I think I'm back on track here.
Rural areas?
Yep, rural areas. One of the things that we are required to do is make sure that funds allocated through this grant are used in rural areas. And we do have a eligibility map, which we'll get that information to you going forward. Next slide, please. The other definition that we have clarified is the Cooperative Development Center. And this is also consistent with cooperative development. The applicant should be able to show how they are assisting cooperative development, not just regular business development. That said, it means that they are providing technical assistance specific to cooperatives. And there's a definition in the NOFA. The majority of the board of directors or governing body has to be comprised of members of a socially disadvantaged group for the centers, and all members must be listed in the application by name and demonstrate how they meet the definition of socially disadvantaged. If applying as a nonprofit, they must provide evidence of their status as a nonprofit corporation in good standing and a copy of their articles of incorporation. Next slide. Socially disadvantaged. This definition does resemble some of the previous versions, but the entire definition is bolded due to the reformatting and clarifications of the definition. When preparing your proposed project, be sure to incorporate this definition of technical assistance.
Okay, so SDGG, Socially Disadvantaged Groups Grant, is a national competition. The funding available is $3 million. So the maximum funds that the applicant can request is $175,000, and there is no minimum request requirement. The performance period is 1 year. So for this funding cycle, the project can start between October 1st of 2024 to January 1st of 2025. And depending on when it started, if it started on October 1st, then the end date would be September 30th of 2025. And if it is started around January 1st, then the end date should be December 31st of 2025. So the performance period is 1 year. The awards will be announced around September 30th. Next slide, please. So who are eligible applicants? Eligible applicants can be cooperatives, group of cooperatives, and cooperative development centers. Their definitions are provided in the notice. And the important thing is, which you'll see here repeated multiple times, is that majority of the governing board members must be more than 50% socially disadvantaged, serving socially disadvantaged groups from rural areas. So any sector of cooperative can apply for the grant funding. It is not restricted only for agricultural cooperatives. Cooperatives can be housing, electric, tourism, childcare, home care cooperatives. So it's not restricted with only agriculture. Group of cooperatives does not have to be separate entities. One cooperative can take lead and apply for the funding. Applicants must verify their incorporation status in the state or tribal in which they are incorporated by providing the state's certificate of good standing and their articles of incorporation. They must also submit their bylaws to provide additional information so that they can ascertain if they are cooperatively governed. Applicants like universities may have a board of regents for the entire university system and a board for the center, but either of them must satisfy the eligibility criteria, which is the majority of the board members more than 50% must be socially disadvantaged, and they must provide TA to the socially disadvantaged group from rural areas. If there is an advisory board just for the proposed project, then that will not meet the requirement. Next slide, please. So applicants must describe how they meet the definition of an eligible applicant type, and they must also list their board members or board of directors, indicating how each member meets the social disadvantage definition. Again, majority needs to be more than 50%. Also, the applicant has to show that the majority of the beneficiaries of the TA are socially disadvantaged. Robbie?
All right. Tribal applicants are sovereign nations and have a government-to-government relationship with the U.S. federal government. We realize tribal structures are unique. We are working on the administration's commitment to flexibly recognize the eligibility of tribal entities. The national office would like to focus on if the project is eligible prior to a determination if a tribal applicant is eligible. Federally recognized tribes and tribal entities will need to demonstrate that they are able to meet all definition requirements of one of the 3 eligible applicant types, and therefore could use a separate entity, such as a tribally owned business, tribal authority, tribal nonprofit, or a tribal college to apply for socially disadvantaged group funding that would provide technical assistance to tribal members. Ineligible applicants, that's a public body or individuals, they're not eligible. And along with our other programs, applicants that have been debarred, so they're suspended for assistance, or has an outstanding judgment, or delinquent on taxes, or been convicted of a felony within the last 24 months are ineligible. Artie?
SDGG program does not require matching funding, just like RCDG. So it is only a grant program that does not require any matching funds. Proposed project must serve members of socially disadvantaged groups that are located in rural areas. Example would be if application is proposing project, where social disadvantaged group members are served in rural areas, that is an eligible purpose. But if there is a proposal to provide TA to a food co-op, which is physically located in an urban area, but it benefits people in rural area, that is not an eligible purpose. So the food co-op needs to be physically located in rural area. Technical assistance and training, they can be done in an urban area, but must document that the persons attending or benefiting are from socially disadvantaged groups from rural areas. Federal funds must be used appropriately and for the purpose it is intended. Applicants must legally be eligible to receive the funds. If not, then there are consequences. They may have to return all the funding as well as get fined. And project purpose must fit with the grant. Example, if they are providing business training without the cooperative development principles, like forming a new cooperative or development of an existing co-op, then they are not eligible. Next slide, please. So here is a link in the slide that is provided to determine if the rural area is an eligible rural area that can apply for the funding. Next slide, please. Debbie?
Thanks. As has been mentioned before, the grant period can be up to 1 year, and your performance start date needs to be between October 1 of 2024 and January 1st of 2025. And then the performance end date would be 1 year from that start date. The thing to keep in mind is that if you ask for an extension and you've started the program in January, it may make you ineligible for the following grant cycle if you were looking towards the second grant. Next slide, please. And then that brings us to applicants with an existing socially disadvantaged group grant or a rural cooperative development grant must be performing satisfactorily to be eligible for this year's funding. This includes having their financial reporting, their SF 425 and SF 270 appropriately filed, timely filed, and performance report submitted to the state office. Also, applicants must be current in the work on their work plan and budget tasks and timeframes included in their application and their grant award. For example, if an applicant has an open 2022 award, they are not eligible. If an applicant has unspent funds from a 2023 award, as long as they have drawn more than 50% of their grant funds as proposed in their application, they would be eligible. If they have not used over 50% of their funding from their current application, they will not be considered eligible and will not be scored. Next slide, please. And along with that, the application has to be complete. All of the elements that are required in the NOFA need to be submitted by the deadline on June 3rd. If information is missing, it will be considered an ineligible application and will not be reviewed. Next slide. Okay, and as was mentioned before, applications cannot duplicate current services. So as you're putting the application together, you need to think, if you're a new applicant, this probably doesn't apply. If you're an existing SDGG applicant, you need to be careful that you're either working with new clients and providing the same services that are in your current grant, or working with the existing clients in your current grant and providing new technical assistance services to them. Next slide. The other issue with applications is we are not able to accept more than one application from an entity. Only one SDGG grant application is eligible each funding cycle. Some entities may apply for both SDGG and RCDG, but the projects must be different as well as the customers must be different. The organizational documents, articles of incorporation, bylaws, and/or information with the application should provide this. Applicants may submit only one SDGG grant for each fund cycle if two applications are submitted, regardless of the applicant name on the form, and they include either the same executive director or advisory boards or committees of an existing cooperative development center. Both applications will be removed from the scoring and funding and considered ineligible. Funding cannot be used for duplicate activities or paid for by that are paid by other federal grant programs. So that will be something that will be evaluated by the state office when your application is submitted. And next slide, Margaret.
You're on mute. While Margaret's trying to unmute, I'll go over this slide. Using the template is strongly recommended to assist with the application process. Be sure to read and provide all information requested in the NOFO to be prepared for all aspects of application process. Applicants should contact the USDA Rural Development State Office for more information and understanding of state-specific particulars.
Thank you, Robbie. Next slide, yes. Of course, we will need the standard form 424, there is an application, and the standard form 424A, which is budget, along with a federal debt and judgment statement. For more information about this, please go to click on the link for the how-to video series of those forms. Next slide. Thank you. The table of contents is listed in the template. An executive summary briefly describes the proposed project along with the tasks to be completed and cannot exceed 1 page. This summary should give a general overview of the proposed project. Next slide. Robbie?
Thanks. The application needs to describe how the applicant is one of the eligible applicants. It will then need to provide a list of the entire board and describe which and how a board member meets the definition of a socially disadvantaged group. This board member list should show that a majority, 50.1% or over, of the board is from a socially disadvantaged group. Also, the proposed projects will need to show that they are serving a majority of socially disadvantaged groups in rural areas. If the application fails to demonstrate that the majority of the board is from a socially disadvantaged group, it is ineligible. Application must verify the incorporation status with a certificate of good standing and their articles of incorporation. A good reminder is to also submit your bylaws in case they are needed to verify your legal status. Higher institutions aren't required to verify legal status. However, they must demonstrate how it qualifies as such. Each applicant can only apply for one grant. For example, if a cooperative applies and wants to or does apply with a group of cooperatives, that is not eligible and both applications would be thrown out. All organizational verification should be included in Appendix A. If the documents aren't included, they won't be considered for funding. All right, use of funds. Provide a brief discussion on how the proposed project activities meet the definition of technical assistance and identify the socially disadvantaged groups that will be assisted in rural areas. Project area. Provide specific information that details the location of the project and explain how the area meets the definition of rural. The grant period. Include an eligible time frame for the proposed project and discuss how the project will be completed within that time frame. See the NOFO for more information. On indirect costs, if you're including them, indicate in the application if there is a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, NICRA, and if so, the rate. Or indicate if you're an applicant that would use the de minimis rate of 10%. Pardon?
So for SDGG, there's total of 6 scoring criteria sections. Each section must be addressed with a narrative. So if any of the scoring criteria is not addressed, then the applications will be ineligible. Each scoring criteria has a page limit. So make sure that when you look into the notice, the page limit is given over there. So when you are making your application, follow that page limit. Next slide, please. The annual performance measures is to know if the applicant is on track with the tasks that are proposed in their work plan and budget. So this is the way the rural development will be evaluating if the applicant meet those performance measures. Applicants must provide estimates on the number of co-ops and social disadvantaged groups they have assisted. And if applicable, there are other measures that are listed here, providing more information if that is eligible, if that is applicable to your application will help the reviewers to understand your application better. Next slide, please. Megan?
Hey, everybody. When submitting your application, the applicant must have a UEI, Unique Entity Identifier, and active registration within sam.gov. This registration must remain active at all time during the active application and award process. Remember to also complete the financial assistance general certifications and representations within SAMS.gov. Only applicants with the listed exemption will not have to provide UEI. The agency is unable to make an award without a complete SAM.gov registration. Print the submission and or email. You may need this in case your submission isn't approved in a timely manner. If your entity has not yet registered in the System for Award Management, SAM, please begin this process as soon as possible. Your application EIN and the EIN in sam.gov must match, or the entity may be deemed ineligible. Make sure to review at USDA RD Rural Business Cooperative Services how-to video series about this. Also, when registering, make sure you chose Register for Financial Assistance Awards only, or Register for All Awards. It's not acceptable to choose Get a Unique Entity ID only. Then Debbie.
Okay. The next item that you need to cover is to make sure that your applicant is complete for the socially disadvantaged group grant. And it must be submitted by 11:59 Eastern Time on June 3rd, 2024, using the grants.gov system. Please review grants.gov application registration for instructions on the process of organizations registering as soon as possible to ensure applicants are able to meet the electronic application deadline. No secure password protected documents are to be uploaded to grants.gov. It will make your application basically unreadable on our end. Contact your state or local office if you need assistance with your application. Applications received after the deadline are not eligible for funding under this notice and will not be evaluated. The agency will not solicit or consider new scoring or eligibility information that is submitted after the deadline. That said, the agency reserves the right to ask applicants to clarify information and additional verification of assertions in the application. Next slide. Another piece that's required because it is federal funding is the intergovernmental review process, and this allows applications to be reviewed and consultation on proposed assistance with state and local governments. Federally recognized Indian tribes are exempt from this requirement. Many states have established a single point of contact for the state offices to work with, and you'll need to contact your state office for details and the information that they desire. Next slide, Robbie.
Okay, now we're going into funding restrictions and ineligible projects. I will not be reading them all. There is a long list, so please review the NOFO. So starting off, all realms of construction projects are ineligible. purchasing, renting equipment or vehicles, boats, funding grant preparation, funds considered unallowable per the NOFO or the CFR. This is important. Any projects regarding production, those are not eligible either. No funding of research and development or purchasing land or activities paid by other federal grant programs. No costs prior to the date of the grant approval will be allowed. Also, some more, cannot pay any operating costs of the applicant not directly related to the project. Can't pay expenses for applicant employee training or professional development not directly related to the project. Can't pay for any goods or services from a person or entity who has a conflict of interest with the applicant. And you can't pay for technical assistance provided to a cooperative that does not have a membership that consists of a majority of members from socially disadvantaged groups. Also, regarding any ineligible costs, if we cannot determine the percentage of ineligible costs, applications will not be considered for funding. It is imperative you break down and detail the costs within the work plan and budget. Operating expenses of the applicant not related to the project, we cannot pay. It has to be project related. Participant support costs are for costs incurred for payment to attendees of the programs. It allows a stipend or an allowance for travel costs, registration fees in connection with conferences or training projects. An example of allowable cost of a conference registration fee that includes meals, hotel, mileage, materials for conference training as part of proposed projects. If we can determine ineligible costs and they are 10% or less of the total grant funds, we will consider the application for funding. If the application is recommended for funding, those ineligible costs must be removed and can be replaced with eligible costs. If we can't determine the percentage, the application will not be considered for funding. Okay, regarding hemp and other products, applicants could provide technical assistance to entities who produce hemp. Valid hemp licenses are required for recipients at the time of award. For example, if the hemp company wanted to convert to a cooperative business, they could use grant funds for that technical assistance. Please note, the purpose of the program is to provide technical assistance, so funding for production of hemp or marketing of hemp production is not eligible. Grant funds should not include assistance for groups who make products designated for consumption by humans or animals unless the unless the products have FDA approval. Artie?
So important requirements. Application must be not less than 11-point font. And we will accept only electronic applications to grants.gov. No paper copies, no drop-off, no emails, etc. These have already been stated. Grants.gov submission, UEI and SAM.gov registration is required. Also, the UEI number must be associated with the correct tax ID of the applicant. Since these are time-consuming, we strongly recommend not to wait until the application deadline, but begin way ahead of the of the time. Next slide, please. Okay. So once you complete your application through grants.gov, you will receive automated acknowledgement with a tracking number. So we recommend that you save this information and provide this information to your state officials. So that way they know that application is coming from so-and-so, and they will keep you informed about the application process. Okay, that's scoring information, Margaret, you will be taking over.
Very good. Thank you. For scoring information, the state office, the quality review personnel, and the scoring panelists are only able to consider what is in the application without any assumptions or discussions. Just make sure the narrative is accurate and consistent to support the eligibility and to utilize all the tools available. Please note, if links are placed into the application, we are not allowed to click on the links or to add information to that application. You must discuss it within the application. An issue we have seen is the information is in a different section of the application. It needs to be in the correct section, or at least a reference to where it is within the application by page number and by section in order for that information to be considered. Next slide. Applications with less than an 11-point font will not be evaluated or scored by the panel. Robbie?
All right, with the technical assistance section, applicants must address the needs of the proposed project's socially disadvantaged groups and explain how needs were determined. Include the proposed technical assistance to the socially disadvantaged groups and what are the expected outcomes. Make sure to include how the socially disadvantaged groups will benefit from the project or project. To score higher, provide past projects and demonstrate successful outcomes where the applicant identified needs and provided technical assistance to socially disadvantaged groups. Within the work plan and budget, provide activities to include specific and detailed descriptions of all tasks within that activity. You must provide key personnel for each task. The budget needs the what, when, who, and a detailed account of how much each task will cost. A breakdown of cost is necessary. Reviewers, scorers must be able to determine and understand what is being proposed and how the grant funds will be spent. Examples are listed here of detailed costs. Reviewers, scorers need to understand how you arrived at that number and how each expense refers to tasks being performed. Reviewers and scorers also need to we've said this probably 20 times already, discern all costs. Higher scores will be given to when the work plan and budget provides a clear, detailed, logical, realistic, and efficient plan. These costs must match and reconcile with the SF 424A, the budget Margaret mentioned earlier, using the applicable budget object class categories. Questions we consider: are the proposed costs reasonable? Refer to the 2 CFR 200 subpart E, cost principles, section 200.404 for details. We have to be able to tell whether the purpose of it is reasonable. Explain what the expense really is. Is it ordinary and necessary for the operation of this? Example, if someone's charging a fee for hour as a consultant, is that reasonable? Is that reasonable for that type of work? Is it reasonable for that area? Does the applicant need X number of new laptops to carry out the project successfully? Are they providing cooperative development, technical assistance, or just general business TA? All right, also include specific tasks and how the customers will be identified and selected. Key personnel's work and experience should be explained how it ties to the work plan task. If the person hasn't been hired, Provide a description of the new person's qualifications. Evaluation methods must be included and should be how the applicant determines the success of the activities, tasks, and the objectives. Evaluation methods are not the same as the agency's performance measures previously discussed. And these evaluation measures should go beyond quantitative or numeric measurements and provide qualitative methods. Megan?
Now we're going to talk about the experience criteria. For the experience criteria, please describe the technical assistance experience for each key personnel and or each identified staff member or consultant, and the years of experience providing the assistance that matches what's in the work plan and budget. Also discuss the commitment and availability of the personnel. Have they pledged their time and how much time? And with the experience criteria, resumes for personnel and consultants should be included in Appendix B. The experience section of the application and resumes should match the skills required in the work plan and budget. If resumes are not attached by the deadline, they will not be considered for funding. To score higher, the application section should demonstrate that personnel and consultants have strong credentials and are available, and will make it highly likely that the project will be successful. Remember, you must list all the cooperatives and or boards the personnel and consultants are part of. Debbie? Debbie may be on mute.
You're right, I'm on mute. We're going to move on to talk about commitment, and the projects that are located in persistent poverty counties will score the highest. There, on the slide in the middle at the bottom, you'll see underlined persistent poverty counties. That's a link to help you identify whether your project is in a persistent poverty county or not. And for those that are, if in the persistent poverty county, the population limit expands to 55,000 for the county seats located in the counties. On the bottom right-hand side, you'll see some links to information that can help you identify commitment to distressed areas and provide some statistics. Next slide, please. The next criteria is local support. And what we're looking for here is a discussion that includes the previous and or expected support, along with the applicant's plan to coordinate with other economic development organizations in the rural area. There is a 3-page limit for this discussion. Next slide. And another thing that we're looking for as part of that local support is support letters. And these letters need to be signed and dated after the publication date of the NOFA so that we're sure that those letters are current. That would be April 3rd, 2024, and should be from potential beneficiaries and other organizations you plan to coordinate with. Also, letters having an appearance of being identical in form and signed by multiple beneficiaries or organizations will not be considered. When referencing letters of support in this section, make sure to provide the organization's name, date on the letter, and the nature of the support and the name or title of the signer. Next slide. Artie?
So the USDA RDCS administrator may choose up to 10 points, 10 discretionary points. For all the criteria, the maximum score that the applicant can receive is 95 points, with the additional 10 administrator discretionary points, which are divided into 5 points for the new applicant, new SDGG applicant who has not received any SDGG award earlier or any other times. It's a brand new applicant. And the other 5 points are for any applicant who discusses to advance the key priorities that are in the notice. They will be recommended for those 5 points. So total of admin discretionary points are 10 points divided between 2, 5 and 5. Next slide, please. Applications will be reviewed by the state officials. They will go through the application eligibility and all the details that are provided, and they will make their determination and submit those applications to the national office. National office will perform the quality control reviews. Once the quality control reviews are done, then those applications will be turned in for the panel review and scoring. The panel will be reviewing each application and and scoring those applications. Then the final applications with the scores will be submitted for the administrator discretionary points, and applications will be funded from the highest score until the funding limit is spent. Some of the applications that may be eligible but may not receive complete funding, but they may receive partial funding as depending on how much the funds are available. Next slide. I guess we are end of the
Yay.
presentation. Robbie.
Yes, so yeah. So do we have any questions in the chat?
Yeah, well, we have some questions that came in. I can read the questions, and we have some great people here that can answer. So the first question about the definition of key personnel. Should we list any employee providing any amount of technical assistance as key personnel, or do we have discretion to determine who has the expertise or role to be indispensable to the project? So how detailed do we need to go with the key personnel?
So can I take this question? So when we look at the key personnels, we are looking at all the tasks that are listed onto the work plan and budget. All those tasks and the person who will be performing those tasks or who will be responsible for those tasks, must be listed in the application. So when we look at the application, we need to make sure that the task has a person who will be responsible for it, or number of people who will be responsible for completing that task. So when we talk about key personnel, we expect to see all the people who will be contributing to the project. In what ways we will be looking at all those details.
Debbie, would you like to help answer that question?
Sure. I think one of the things that the panel will be looking for is to identify the key people that are responsible for carrying out the tasks, and do they have the qualifications? In looking at the information provided about their experience, does it match the tasks that they've been assigned? We're not really interested in the hours that a bookkeeper might do, but if the bookkeeper is providing information about how to set up the books for a cooperative to be able to operate correctly and keep good records, then that is something that we would want to know. But if they're doing, just bookkeeping for the grant, no, we don't want to necessarily need to know that detail.
Yeah, I think that's helpful, Debbie. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question. If a group has received this grant in the past, more than 3 years ago, are we eligible to apply again?
Of course. I would say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Easy answer. Great. Thank you. Another question. Can the applicant include indirect costs in the application? What could be considered an indirect cost? Debbie?
I'll jump in. I knew that was coming. An indirect cost, if you do not have a negotiated rate with the government, you're limited to take 10% of the total grant project. So 10% of the 175. If you ask the full amount. Things that are considered indirect would be for the overall operation of the project. So things like keeping your records, accounting for the project, things that are not specific to any one task and that may be more necessary for carrying or for the center itself or for the applicant themselves to be able to carry out the application, but you can't really specify and tie them to a single task.
Another one, your rent, your internet, your phone
Right.
service, your copier, things of that nature.
Yeah.
Okay. Jose Julian, if you have more questions about that, please either put something in the chat or in the questions and answers. Next question, go ahead.
And I was going to say, and if you don't want to ask questions, please reach out to us, email us. Maybe you just rather discuss it one-on-one, and sometimes that, projects are different. So, and that tends to be more helpful.
Our emails are in, I think, about slide 2 or 3 with our
Correct.
pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Thank you. Robbie, this question. How can one appropriately show that the board members are from socially disadvantaged groups? Should we list their gender and racial group next to their name?
Correct. That'd be one way of doing it. Yes, definitely. We're asking for the whole list so we can verify that it is a majority.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ones, like you just said, that would be a good way to do it. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question from Jose Julian. Members of the board of directors, should they be living? Okay, let's see. Members of the board of directors must be living at greater than 50% in rural areas. Do the board of directors need to live in rural areas?
No. Just the project that you're doing, that you're providing, has to be in a rural area.
Okay, thank you. That helps. Can applications be physically taken to the USDA Rural Development Office by the deadline?
No.
Sorry, no.
Unfortunately,
Electronic applications through grants.gov.
Grants.gov, yeah. Sorry about that. Another question. Can you please explain the intergovernmental review further? We are in Colorado, where I was told this is not applicable. Is that correct?
In part, yes. The intergovernmental review is something that is required anytime federal funds are used for a project. Because this grant is a technical assistance only, the information that they need is limited. And it's not like you're building a building where you have to look at wetlands and endangered species and those types of things. But what we need to do is document that, yes, it is a technical assistance project, and it's considered a categorical exclusion because of that. Some states require more information to be able to make that determination. So that if you've talked with your state office and they've told you you don't need any more information, then you're good.
and definitely reach out to your state office if you haven't.
That's helpful. Thank you. Another question. What is meant by the nature of the support for letters of support?
Okay.
That may be something from Robbie's slide deck. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we mean is, you've got the letter that should explain what their support is, if they're supporting it, why they're supporting it, maybe how they're supporting it. But in the application itself, you're kind of summarizing what that letter says. And Marion, if that's not helpful or if someone else wants to add to that.
I
So
think
It
Okay.
should
one
not be
thing-
a general purpose support letter. It should be related with the project.
Yes,
right.
exactly.
So if they're going to provide meeting space for you, or they're going to send out mailings for you to announce meetings, that would be one thing that they, the type of support that they could be contributing.
So you were looking for some specific examples of how
Right.
an organization is supporting the
Right.
project. Good, good. Deborah asks, can you go over the local support a little bit more? What that section should look like within the application narrative.
Hi, Deborah. Um, you want support from beneficiaries and organizations that you may be collaborating with or working, or maybe it's your economic development, an economic development entity who's trying to get cooperative training out, how they're supporting it, in what ways. The beneficiaries would be your end users. Well, that's what we call them, end user, or I call them, is the people that are getting the technical
client.
assistance. Yes. You know, get some letters from them, because it's, you know, we want to make sure it's not the field of dreams that you're going to do it and someone's just going to show up. We want to know that people want this technical assistance. It's
And
needed. We know
and
it's
let me-
needed, but you got to show it in the application.
And just to add, it cannot come from consultants or contractors who are going to be a part of that project. So, you know, providing technical assistance.
Yeah, they can support it, but we're not going to count the letter in the scoring section. And Deborah, reach out. You know, you've got my email if we can help you further or a more specific question.
Another question. Your slide listed eligible applicants as individual cooperatives, groups of cooperatives, and cooperative development centers. So does that mean nonprofit organizations are not eligible to apply?
So cooperative development centers can be any nonprofits or institution of higher education.
Right.
But the important thing to note here is that they still must meet the criteria of having 50% or more of the socially disadvantaged group members. And they must be providing technical assistance to socially disadvantaged group members and in rural areas.
Yeah, so nonprofits definitely can apply if they are co-op development centers
Yes.
or institutions of higher learning can be the cooperative development center. It was stated that cooperatives are not restricted to agriculture. Would you please give the examples again?
So it can be any type of cooperatives like cultural, tourism, home care cooperatives, any kind of cooperative. Like even Robbie mentioned, if you know, in case of hemp, if they are looking to form a new cooperative, they can apply for the funding to form a new cooperative. The funding is not eligible for production or any sales or anything, but you know, any type of cooperative can apply. It is not just related with agriculture, like producing, you know, plants and all those things.
Yes,
So
like some
housing,
example-
worker cooperatives, consumer
Okay.
cooperatives, any type of cooperatives, and as already said, a group of individuals or a business that is considering converting to a cooperative, they can receive technical support. It's not restricted to hemp cooperatives converting or hemp businesses converting. It's any type converting to a cooperative.
So any type of cooperative. Yes, thank you. Thank you. in regards to guidance on multiple grants, is it okay for an organization to apply for a rural cooperative development grant and a socially disadvantaged group grant?
Yeah, I'll take that one since that was my slide. Yes, they can apply for both, but they need to be careful that they're not covering the same service area and doing the same type of tasks and projects in both of them. They need to be very distinct in which tasks are in the SSDG grant and which are in the RCDG. So you can't duplicate an application, do the same project for both applications.
Yeah, it's got to be clear to the state office that you're not double dipping, that they're separate. It has to be clear to them. That's not duplicative.
Right.
Very good. Thank you. Is there a minimum or is there a limit to the numbers of letters of support?
Oh, come on, Shar, you can read. No, just kidding. I believe it's 10, I think is the max points. You can give us 20 letters. You can give us 100, but we're the maximum points for eligible letters of support is 10.
10 letters of support for maximum points. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Got to make sure you've got both beneficiary and organizational, because you may have 10 letters, but if they're all from one, like only from organizations, then no, you won't get full points.
No. So 10 letters from a range of supporters and recipients of that
Mhm.
technical assistance. Thank you. Can applicants utilize a regional framework where technical assistance is coordinated through state-based cooperative development centers?
If I'm understanding that, yes. Terrence, if you want to clarify that further, but we've had like multiple states projects where they're working in multiple states. It could be that type of regional, or just maybe Southern California would be regional. So if you want to put a more specific question in there, I hope that answered your question.
It sounds from the question like Terrence is talking about a group of cooperatives that will come together and apply for the SDGG, and I don't see why there'd be any problem.
Reach out to us, reach out to your state, either one, both, to go over what you're wanting to do, just to be sure.
Yeah, if that is
Yes.
so go ahead, Terrence.
Yes, I was talking about cooperative development, technical assistance taking place across multiple states. Right now, we at the Federation are working with cooperative development centers, associations in 7 states, and each of them have, several cooperatives within that state. So I guess my question is, could a framework like that, be usable? But then my follow-up question is, with such a broad spectrum, a broad scope, a regional framework, would the individual cooperatives served still need to be identified and named?
Okay, I'm going to touch on one of the issues that may come up in that structure. Depending on whether the Federation is the lead entity, they need to be careful that the other cooperative centers that they would be working with are not also applying. Or if they do, that they have their own UEI and their own tax ID and SAMS information, because there's been some overlap historically, and we just be very, very careful how you decide who the applicant would be. And they would need to identify the cooperatives that they would be working with, and they need to be in rural areas.
Maybe this is something that should be talked about offline, but because of the risk of, possibly 2 groups, both applying for SDGG and not knowing about each other, the coordination would have to be really
Yeah.
good. But you know, it seems to me that if separately different groups apply for SDGG and get SDGG, subsequently they could probably coordinate the technical assistance.
As long as they're both not doing the same thing.
Right.
Yes. And Terrence, if you want to talk about it more, we'd be happy to have a more in-depth conversation offline.
Yeah, please contact us.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question. The letter of support, does it need to have a cursive signature on it? Will it be considered if it's something else?
Just from being on previous panels with SDGG, but Artie, you can confirm, it can't be a, what do you call it, a GIF or a photo of a signature. It needs to be what we call a wet signature where someone signed it. Or if it's an electronic signature that has, you know, the time, date, and time and date stamp on it, like Adobe has. And if that didn't answer your question or someone wants to expand on that.
Nope, I think that's it.
I think that's
Okay.
it. Yeah, thank you. Okay, for applicants that have an active SDGG award, you mentioned needing to have 50% of the funds drawn down, and I think I heard a progress report filed with the state is required. Is this report the same as the mid-year one that is due on June 30th, or is there a separate template for that?
It's the mid-year report.
The June 30th?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, depending on when they started their application, it might be June 30th or it might be April.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
And I'm going to add something there. You had mentioned the 50% of the funds drawn down, and it's really bad for me to do math off the top of my head. But let's say you had only asked for 100,000, and by the time you're submitting this grant, you know, you were supposed to have 50,000 of that by June, let's say, drawn down. 50% means you don't have to have 50,000. Not 50% of the total grant, but 50% at that period in time. So for the example I'm giving, you'd have to at least have spent 25,000 or more. And if I confused you more, I'm sorry, just please reach out to us if you have questions on that.
Yeah, it's 50% of your work plan timeline as of the grant date of the application.
Okay.
Application deadline date. So as of June 3rd.
Right.
What were you supposed to have spent already?
Okay.
50% of that.
Okay. Regarding board members, could you talk a little bit more about the distinction between a governing board and an advisory board?
Debbie?
Margaret, Margaret, you explained that very well, the advisory board and the for your citizens. Probably you can go to this question.
Yeah, advisory boards basically provide information to the center, but they really don't have authority to determine what the program is. They're just there to provide information, say, hey, we see this going on in our community and we think it needs to be addressed. Whereas a board of directors or a governing board actually sets the policy for the center. They determine hiring policies, they determine budget policies, they hire the executive director. An advisory board does none of those things.
And it is common at a university or a large nonprofit that they may have an advisory board, but the Board of Regents would be the actual governing board.
Correct.
Could you explain what is considered a collaborative? If my company is a limited liability company, am I eligible? Megan?
you may be eligible if you operate as a cooperative. So operating as a cooperative means that you provide patronage based on use. Your members govern democratically, and you you may adhere to the international cooperative principles. So all of these different aspects of being a cooperative, and they're listed in the slide deck, you would want to follow. Those aspects would be reflected in your bylaws. And you want to make sure that you explain why you're a cooperative. Some states don't have very good cooperative laws, and so people operate under a different statute, like an LLC statute. Some states have cooperative laws, but they don't quite fit the business model that the cooperative is operating as. But bottom line, if you are not operating just like a cooperative, you are not eligible.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Clint's question. Do the applicants have to be a cooperative development center? Can they be a business development center that uses funds specifically for cooperative development projects to socially disadvantaged groups? Assume that the organization board meets the eligibility requirements for being socially disadvantaged.
Clint, if
So,
the business development center is a nonprofit and meets the SDGG requirement of 50% of their board, and they're planning a project that is cooperative development, then they would be eligible.
Good, thank you. Clarification question. Did I just hear that cooperative development centers cannot apply to start a new cooperative, for example, home care co-ops?
No.
No,
No.
I don't think, I think that may have been a misspoke. Cooperative Development Center it's intended that the Cooperative Development Centers start new cooperatives.
Okay, thank you. If a portion of the project area or target group falls within the administrator's extra point priorities, how should that proportion be described?
So read that one more time, Margaret.
If a portion of the project area or target groups fall within the administrator's extra point priorities, how should that proportion be described?
So the admin discretionary points are 10 points, which are divided into two parts. One is if it is a brand new SDGG applicant who has not received any previous awards of SDGG, then that can be recommended for the 5 points. The other 5 points is any applicant who try to discuss about advancing the key priorities that are listed onto our notice. If they are trying to advance that, and if they have discussed that in their application, those applications can be recommended for the other 5 points. So there are total 10 admin discretionary points. Does that answer your question?
I'm going to explain that a little bit further. So say you have 5 different projects. One of them is hitting that project area or target group that you're discussing. Then discuss that in your request for administrator points, because X project that we listed in the work plan, and explain what that was, will hit whichever key priority. You need to tell us which project or projects you're working on hits which or more than one of the key priorities. And Wyatt, if that doesn't answer your question, please re-ask or reach out.
Okay. Can the technical assistance be for socially disadvantaged members of a larger cooperative?
As long as it's 50%. the cooperative has 50% or more of socially disadvantaged groups. If you do not, I would suggest applying for the
RCDG.
RCDG. And if you're a co-op, then, you know, get with the Co-op Development Center to request assistance, because a co-op or a group of co-ops is not an eligible applicant for RCDG, unfortunately. And there's another question, 10 letters or up to 10 letters of support. Yeah, you can have one. Obviously, the more eligible support letters you have, the more points that you would receive. And I think there was a previous question about indirect and ineligible costs.
Yeah, let me
Okay.
get that one. I saw that. There are costs that are considered ineligible, and those would be things like seeds, things that would not, that you may identify as tasks you want to do, but are not eligible uses of the fund. They're not technical assistance. There is an allowance of 10% of your total grant project for, it's called de minimis, and it's a tiny amount, and it's intended to cover the administrative costs of things like having rent, having to have somebody fill out reporting, keeping track of your accounting systems and those things. That's what the indirect covers. When it is directly related to the grant proposal, it's considered eligible. Hopefully that helps clarify that. If not, please give one of us a call and we can go into more detail about that.
And then I think we have time. One last question. I'm with a nonprofit based in Detroit, Michigan. Our program is turning vacant lots into community gardens and holding community outreach teaching events. Is there anything available for urban development? Can you use SDGG for a project like this?
You would not be able to use SDGG for that, but there is a program through the Natural Resource Conservation Service. They are doing hoop house grants, and they're focusing that effort on urban gardening and converting vacant lots. So I would contact your local NRCS office, and they should be able to help you get to the right person.
Great. Thank you so much. My goodness, an hour and a half has flown by. Thank you so much, National Cooperative Business Association, for sponsoring this this informative, I hope it was informative, webinar. Thank you to Atilde Cooperative Translating Services. You've done a wonderful job. We apologize for how quickly we spoke and for all the acronyms, but thank you once again. And if you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to reach out to one of us at Rural Development. So happy writing, and we look forward to some good applications. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being a part of this webinar, and everyone have a great day.
You too.
You too. Thanks.